Hello, welcome to Fireside Chats. My name is Magla Pillay, and I bid you a very warm welcome to today's show. The topic Fireside Chats was particularly chosen to show how your burning questions can become cool resolves. Today we look at the topic of freedom and conscience. The subject matter is of particular interest in this series because we're looking at questions of philosophical and spiritual integrity. We look at how you can become a person of integrity. We look at how you can incorporate spirituality into your life so that you can lead what we call a spiritually balanced existence. We will also look at how one can include God into one's daily life, and by that I mean engaging with God and including God into the little things that we do throughout the day so that our lives can become spiritually balanced. To that end, we have a very special speaker, Sister Denise, who has been practicing Raj Yoga meditation for over 40 years and who brings to bear a wealth of experience and wisdom into this show, and specifically today's topic, which is entitled Freedom and Conscience. Sister Denise, a very warm welcome to today's show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, freedom and conscience. There are those who might think that the one clashes with the other, because freedom means to many people the power to do whatever you want, and conscience is seen as being very restrictive and doesn't allow you to do whatever you want. How does one go about finding a balance between the two?
Well, there's the philosophical positioning, freedom on the one hand, responsibility on the other hand. So we are free to do and say whatever we want, but it doesn't come without a price. So we have to bring in a little bit the idea of philosophy of karma here, because you're free to do a wrong action, no doubt, and you will pay the price. You're free to do that too. But who in their right mind would want to make their lives miserable unnecessarily? So really it's a question of reminding a person that you are free. You can do whatever you want, but it is strongly recommended that you calculate the consequences of your free choice, because if you make choices that are rewarding, then you'll be rewarded. If you make choices that are going to cost you, then you cannot avoid the payment. I think one of the reasons people disregard it is because your payment is not always immediate. Sometimes the time of reckoning comes a lot later on, but surely it comes. And the more hedonistic approach of live now, pay later, or live now, don't pay at all, or get somebody else to pay, you're dreaming, because time moves so fast that before you know it, the consequences of your action come up, and then you have to face that. And a lot of people, they are unwilling, unable, but it's inescapable. You can't escape.
Sister Denise, the fact that we are responsible for our own behavior is nothing new to most people watching this show. Why is it that we have a virus within our psyche that causes us not to appreciate the fact that we are responsible for our behavior? What makes us blind?
I think
what makes somebody who has for example, a terminal illness or experiencing physical suffering, not able to understand that I'm paying the price for something that I did in the past. Why are we deliberately blind?
Well, a big part of it is faulty logic. I had a friend who was very fixed on, I cannot go against my word. And there were times when that principle was clearly not a very intelligent principle because it cost so much. And this was a principle coming from conventional morality that this friend of mine had bought into totally. And it cost this person so much, you can't imagine. And so I think we have to really look at some of our fixed ideas and just decide, who came up with this in the first place. And if you can track who came up with it and find that it was just somebody who just dreamed it up, and you bought into it to such an extent that it limits your life very, negatively, then you need to really rethink your whole system of personal morality. And that is quite a big thing to ask people to do. But when you see something like this and how it plays out, it's really not good.
What is your definition of conscience?
Conscience is a section of the human intellect. And the intellect is the part of consciousness that is able to distinguish between whether something is true or false, whether something is coherent or incoherent, whether something is logical or illogical, whether something makes sense or doesn't make sense, you see. And then conscience is the part that takes it a little further to it's good or it's bad. Good means there's a beneficial outcome for you and for everybody else. And bad means it's going to really cost you and it's going to really cost everybody else, which is going to add to what it's going to cost you because you have caused this. So it's the calculating aspect of the consciousness. And what I think we need to do is to refine it and fine-tune it so that we work with conscience much more than we do. Because the problem I find in most people I talk to is they hear the voice of conscience, they go against it.
Denise, on that subject, one need not go further than today's newspaper, where you see both adults and children conducting themselves in a manner that is abominable. And whilst they can't not know that their behavior is going to cause harm to themselves and others, and they don't even do it reluctantly, they do it enthusiastically. What has brought humanity to this point where it's become normal to see people harming each other in such a shocking manner?
Well, you see, again, we come back to the emotions and people operating on the basis of their emotions and saying, well, if it feels bad to me, what I'm observing or feeling, then it is justifiable for me to have the reaction that I'm also feeling, So if somebody is in the parking space that I want to occupy, I'm justified in killing them, which is something that happened just recently, and of course created a very great sense of outrage, But it shows you that people's ability to manage their emotions is so limited which to me, from the angle of spirituality, tells me that that person is spiritually totally weak, absolutely with no personal power at all, and just making excuses, justifying, and there isn't very much out there in the world to let a person know that operating in that manner is not okay. And I think the reason for this is commercial.
Okay, so what you're saying is that people operate in this manner. I feel, therefore I do. Okay, what's the firewall that can stop such a decline from happening?
I think it cannot be the will, because when a person is weak, the will is really weak as well. So I think the firewall has to come from a number of places. One is the kinds of message that we put out on a program like this, for example. Another one is the family system. But the problem with that is most family systems are pretty dysfunctional, and so that is not working very well. Another thing is the prevailing social attitudes. But prevailing social attitudes are very tainted at the moment, so that is not working very well. So I think that we are actually in a crisis point where people's weak emotions are more powerful than anything else or than everything else put together, which is a very dangerous moment in human culture, which is, I think, why we are really seriously looking at this and seeing what can be done. And of course, from my angle, the only thing that can be done is we have to strengthen ourselves spiritually. And for that, we have to really take a look at what is a self and what is God, and how does God enable a weak self to become strong.
Denise, we have many situations where people want to be what you just described because it sounds so beautiful. Okay, in theory, most people listening to you would want to be what you just said. But, when it comes to your actual behavior, they find it almost impossible. You're describing a person who operates from a position of power. How do you get such power? As you speak, what is obvious is that in order to follow your conscience, not necessarily to the T, but largely, you need some sort of power. Okay? And there is not much of that left. Not in human beings individually, not in mankind collectively. How do you become the person that you'd like to be, as opposed to what you see in the mirror, what you wake up to every morning?
If people would have the kind of conversations that we're having, it will give them motivation. Because people need a motivation to empower themselves. Nobody's going to empower anybody. Never happened. You have to empower yourself.
I'd like to interrupt you there. So many people don't know that. Because if I'm weak, the natural thing to do is to go plug into somebody else who I respect/admire. Okay? And there is, you're saying that that's not available?
Well, if you're running on empty and you plug into someone else who's pretty much empty.
But though they appear not to be.
Yeah, but they are.
Everyone's empty, whether they appear to be or not?
Well, some people are more empty than others.
Okay. Okay. But so whoever you plug into, make sure they've got more.
But pretty soon
they will be empty.
They're empty, especially if you plug in and sort of become an energy drain on another person. I think this is the problem. You try and plug into people, places, things, status symbols, positions, all of this, and you think that is going to make you powerful. It's a delusion. It's an illusion. So what I do is I plug into God, who never gets empty. But how do you plug into God?
Ah, yes, that is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Take us to that.
Well, God is very, very subtle. God is non-human. God is non-material. God is not some all-pervading energy that you can somehow plug into, you know. God is the word we use generally to refer to that source, that power, that being who contains the totality of all power that is needed by humanity. And if every human on earth would plug into that, there'd still be enough to go around. But then, you know, this is so outside the ken of most people, even I would say beyond most cultures, beyond many of the religions, that we really have to, you know, move out of the box to start to make this kind of connection.
Okay, so when one goes through the course of one's daily life, and you are at a crossroads, whether to go this way or that way, and you need to make a decision and you need to involve your conscience. How do you do that in a way that's beneficial for you?
You see, the problem is why people go against their conscience is because if they follow their conscience, someone will disagree. Or if they follow their conscience, they will have to do an act of courage. And maybe they don't have courage. And so it's too difficult. It's too scary. So it means that in order to follow your conscience, you have to be willing to forfeit approval. You have to be willing to do something that may not be what everybody wants you to do or expects you to do. If you follow your conscience, somebody may strongly object, or it may cost you. It may cost you your job. It may cost you your marriage. It may cost you all sorts of things. So people get very confused, and they tend to follow the prevailing social attitudes or the ideas of the most powerful person who's around, you see, because people are very subject to other people, very under the influence of other people. And, you know, I was talking on another occasion about addiction. You see, you can be addicted to people as well and do whatever they want, even if it's against your conscience. And there you're really betraying yourself and really compromising your spirit, you see. So I think these conversations are very useful, and for people to really get into this kind of conversation with each other, because it can be a very good motivating force to take a step of courage and do the right thing at the risk of somebody else's displeasure, and just see it's quite possible that you can take a step of courage and everything will work out very well, you see. And once you have done that a few times and realize the sky does not fall on your head if you do the right thing, then that may give you more of a motivation to do it.
Mr. Denise, this requires courage, strength, wisdom, power, an entire gambit of virtues. Is it hard to be what you just described? None of it sounds easy to the ordinary person.
Well,
because it seems like a uphill mountain climb without the benefit of ropes. It sounds beautiful and doable, but to apply it into one's life is not necessarily easy, because the conscience is your own higher standard, and it's always up there, and it asks you to rise to it.
This is where the question of God comes in. People say, maybe even if they don't believe in God, they will sometimes at a point like this say, oh God, give me strength. That means you can do that. If you don't have the strength, you can call upon that strength, but you have to do it a little powerfully, so that you really affirm your right to take power, you see. And this is where I think getting into a relationship with God, getting into a conversation with God is going to help, because you're going to realize when you start to create a relationship that there is somebody on the other end of your reaching out, and you can get signs, signals, and positive reinforcement to let you know that there definitely is someone out there, and you're not on your own, and you can take strength and you can take guidance. Just do it.
Okay, so Denise, there are some who have a conscience that tells them they've done something wrong when they haven't, who take the conscience, from what I see, can also be damaged.
That's not the conscience. That's something else.
What is it?
Preconception.
Okay. Can I give you an example? If somebody, if your friend asks you to go to the movies with her, okay, and you say no, and your friend does go to the movies and happens to be involved in a car accident, then you feel guilty, because you think that had you been there, the accident wouldn't have happened, because your friend's a lousy driver. So there's this feeling of
that's
guilt.
Not conscience, you see. That's preconception, or you can also call it magical thinking, that you put something together which doesn't go together. That's known as magical thinking.
But this comes not necessarily in thought. It comes by way of feelings. Does your conscience communicate to you just by feelings?
Well, you see, you say, okay, I said no to going to the movie with this person, but that did not cause the person to get into a car accident. But you're assuming that it did. That's magical thinking. You see, and a lot of people do operate out of magical thinking. Why? Because it's in the general conversations that people have. It's to do with superstition. It's not conscience.
Okay. There are many who don't know the difference between the two.
No, they don't.
Because guilt is a very common experience for many. I know somebody who feels guilty every time he says no to anybody for any reason.
Yeah, but
and
you
he's a wonderful person.
Yeah, you feel guilty when you haven't done something wrong because you've been trained that way. That's indoctrination.
Okay, how do you unlearn that then?
Very difficult.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm asking you that question, and not myself. Tell us how. How do you, Sister Denise? How do you unlearn your patterns and create the conscience that you want, as opposed to something that somebody else has created or society has created?
It's actually quite a long process, and it involves a lot of introspection. It involves a lot of teachings, I talked about the teachings of Raj Yoga, and they will actually specifically state, and go into the details of these things. And then the students of such teachings have to observe the self, you see, and observe your patterns, and then also go back to the earliest part of your life. Where did this pattern start? And it usually starts with the way your family functions. You will not be the only person who just out of the clear blue got this idea, you copied members of your family, or you were taught in your school or your religious school or whatever, or, you know, it's the way that people think, who you are surrounded by, the color of the company, you see. So if you are doing that and you notice that there's something wrong with doing that, then you have a motivation to do something about it. But if you don't see anything wrong with it, you're just going to carry on and make your life miserable for no reason, really. But people do that.
The first part of today's topic is freedom. Many listening to you are not free in any way. They're not free mentally, they're not free socially, they're not free financially. Okay? Do we choose our chains?
Well, chains are words. The word chains is to do with karma, you see. We put ourselves in bondage. We find ourselves in bondage because of our thoughts, words, and actions. And our thoughts, words, and actions are very much influenced by our surroundings, by our context, you see. So for a person to be free, they have to become independent of their cultural context. And that's very rare.
It is rare.
That's rare. I think one of the good things that we find in today's world is a lot of people are starting to feel international. They much more easily able to go beyond nationalism, which is quite a constriction. And when people are nationalistic, then they get very caught up in attitudes which are not really tenable because of the way the world is nowadays. So much travel, so many people moving from here to there. We have to understand ourselves as humanity, as a whole, and operate from that approach in order to be a really, I think, morally coherent.
Yeah, so if one finds oneself in the position where you want to literally get rid of your chains and at least start to think for yourself, what would you say to a man or a woman or a child watching you who feels imprisoned, not necessarily physical imprisonment, but imprisoned by their circumstances?
Well, I would say, read, research. We have so many possibilities because of the internet, because of computers and so on, to find out stuff. We are not nearly as constrained as people were in earlier times, and there is so much out there that you can really get yourself educated. If you just have a thought and you want to understand about it, you can get online books, you can read articles. All you have to do is, in a way, I suppose, take a risk to go and find out. And if you find people in your surroundings who seem to be interesting and knowledgeable, have conversations with them. There's so many possibilities, but it needs for us to reach out.
Mr. Denise, last question. God, how do you bring God into this aspect of what you just shared?
God is an intelligence. And an intelligence...
Not many people see him that way.
Yeah, God is an intelligence, not necessarily a him,
Okay.
Yes. Because, as I said, God is genderless. We don't have a pronoun for genderless people because people come in bodies with genders. But when you start to be soul conscious and realize that you yourself are actually independent of the gender of your body, it becomes much easier to conceptualize that there is someone who doesn't have a body, who is discarnate, who is above all these limitations that human beings are bound by, who can also be communicated to and who can communicate back through thought, you see, and is an intelligence who can communicate that intelligence to us, which is extremely useful. I mean, imagine if you had access to the intelligence of God. That's going to make a big difference in your life, you know. And it is possible. But what you have to do is engage in that kind of outreach as well and say, okay, God, I know you're there somewhere. I need to understand you. Come down here and talk to me, kind of thing. Then you have to see, okay, do you believe in such a being? And if so, why? And what do you think? You know, it's a very, very useful exercise to write down on a piece of paper, what do you think? What do you really think? Because something will come up.
Yeah. Sister Denise, that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much for sharing your depth and your wisdom. I really appreciate the fact that although freedom and conscience sound like polar opposite aspects, one can be both a free and a conscionable person. What stays with me, ladies and gentlemen and children, is that Sister Denise shared that you need to know that whatever you do has consequences. A lot of us know this, but choose to ignore it. So Sister Denise drew our attention to that in her extremely sweet and simple way. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope that there's something in today's show that was of value to you, and I hope that you are able to apply this to your life, and in that way bring more integrity into who and what you are. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Sister Denise.
Thank you.